Okay, so now we're ready for a demonstration of the Data Discrepancies user interface. Okay, so here we have the CALPADS home screen. You can see the welcome message, and on the left navigation, you can see Data Discrepancies just below certification status. Simply click Data Discrepancies, and we will land on the Data Discrepancy UI or user interface. There's no errors listed, right? So you're going to have to click Apply Filters to see anything. So, we have three sections. We have our filter section at the top. We have a summary grid and a display grid. So let's apply filters so we can look at some discrepancies and see how the UI works. Okay, so after clicking Apply Filters button, you can see that the summary grid has a list of data discrepancies, both fatal errors and warnings. And we have the display grid, which is a summary of individual records. Okay, so we'll scroll up. Now, having scrolled up, we're back at the top of the screen and we're looking at the filter section. The filters with an asterisk are mandatory. Okay, and they will default to the current academic year, your LEA, and the current submission cycle, or fall one, as the case is right now. You can filter for fatal, all, or warning as far as error severity. And you have to select a filter for the cycle. The certification cycle or the submission cycle is mandatory, and there is no way, there is no option, either blank or all. So you're not going to see all the potential data discrepancies. And that's because when you look at academic year, you have 5 years worth of data discrepancies. So why is that? Why would anybody need 5 years worth of data discrepancies? We remember that some data is pulled directly from the CALPADS ODS. In particular, you have a 4-year and 5-year cohort data set that the CDE will pull. And so you have 5 years worth of data, even a year that you could look forward. Think of open-ended records like student information or programs that are eligibility that have no end date. Erroneous data may occur over the course of multiple years. You have your current year and you have your previous year or several previous years, okay? Then you have record type. So remember, data discrepancies always have a prefix of a file type. And so if it's an enrollment discrepancy, it'll be SENR. If it's student information, it'll be SINF and the like. And then you have filters for SSID and C. When we go down to the summary grid, you can see a list of data discrepancies, both errors and warnings. And the error itself will be a link. This error name will be a link to the CALPADS user manual. Currently, it is not, currently it's not working, but that's what it will be, just as you expect in CALPADS. The error counts do not list. You will always have a summary grid. So it's important that we move down to the summary grid. Since you can't filter for errors here, you're going to want to learn how to use the filters in the heading. And this functionality already exists in CALPADS, so you may be familiar with it, but if not, we'll just cover it real quickly. So if you just click on the title, you might do a quick sort. Alphanumeric, right? Okay, so to filter for a specific record or a specific type of record, you can use the headings here. And so if you're unfamiliar, there's a little handle or toggle, whatever you'd like to call it. And you can see that there are a lot of student information errors listed. We'll use these headings here, right? And so you just have to be careful. It took me a couple times, but you have to think about the statement. Show items with a value that is equal to. So I want to look for a service record. I'll type in the prefix SERV. However, I don't want it to be equal to, because you see that it's entire name. Just go to contains, or better yet, starts with, and I filter and see I only have service errors. These data discrepancies related to special education services. Okay. And then, you know, I want to just clear the filter. And over here, I have a mix of errors. If I wanted just reference record type, just student information records, I can type that in. Equal to is fine, right? Because the entire word is, or the entire prefix is just SINF. And now you see there are no student service records. It's only student information. And so if you're familiar with filtering in Microsoft Access, it's very similar to that. You can be specific, less specific, eliminate nulls, find only nulls, so forth, so on and so forth, right? But you want to use these filter options when looking at specific records. Now, we have the academic year, the error code, the severity, and the name. It says description, but if you reference the CALPADS error list, you'll see that this is just the name. There's not always significant information in the name, and so you have to reference the error list when troubleshooting any errors, whether it's a cert error, a data discrepancy, an input validation rule error. And you want to look at a record in detail view. So let's open a record. And just like other functionality in CALPADS, you click the View button, and the record will be presented in a modal. Here we have at the top information regarding the data discrepancy, trigger the SINF 0453F1 error. You have the name, record type, academic year, and SSID. And we're in the test environment, so don't worry about any student information. But what you have is the entire student information record in front of you, and you can go line by line through all of the fields. One thing to note, this is not a submission error. This is not reflective of data in a file or data in your student information system. Being that it's a data discrepancy, this record is looking at ODS data. All right? Keep that in mind. This record is looking at ODS data. What you see in this error is in CALPADS currently, similar to cert error. Now, part of data discrepancy is you have this UI, and you can go one by one, right? I have 23 errors. Perhaps it's most efficient for me to go one by one and correct all of these. Perhaps it's not. Perhaps I want to download it, go to my student information system, and update the missing parent, guardian, highest education level codes. If I want to make mass changes or do mass identification of errors, you're going to want to use an extract. So you click the extract button. And again, notice that the pre-filtered criteria does not carry over. So be mindful of your filters, right? Those with asterisks must be populated or at least verified. And then think of the error or the record type. I didn't have any SENR record type data discrepancies. I had SINF and I had special education services served. So I want to go SINF. I'm just going to name my file for easy reference. Right? Make sure that you spell correctly. And then you request the file. Same as any other extract. First you request, and then you later go back and retrieve. Extract request made successfully. Please check back on the extract page later for a download. Right? Now, we're going to let the extract run. Let's look what happens when we select filters. And let's say end of year 3. So we have 23 data discrepancies here. Now we're down to 12. And I believe these are the same 12 missing parent guardian highest education level code that carried over into fall 1. And that's because the student information records, those demographic records for the students, have no end date. And so it's carrying over from the 22-23 academic year into the 23-24 academic year. And so that would be one of the great values of having access to this data discrepancy UI now, prior to the snapshots running for fall 1, is that I can clean up this data and it won't trigger a cert error. I minimize my work during the certification process. So here's a list of the students, right? And then if we went to a year before, let's say fall 1, perhaps there will be some, perhaps not. And so there's 10 of these 12 errors that are relevant for the 24-25 academic year. So those definitely would be records from 22-23 that have no end date, and this erroneous data is carrying over the course of 3 different academic years because it's open-ended. All right. So, again, just try to highlight the value of having access to this UI and the potential of correcting data that impacts multiple submissions. Okay, so we requested an extract for our data discrepancies. So let's go retrieve it. So we have to go to extracts. As far as the rollout, and right now, notice that there are no DD extract here, right? So you're not going to request extracts using the search criteria during the rollout. If that functionality comes later, perhaps, but similar to other extracts in the past, not all of them can be requested from the extract screen. But what you can see is the extract type is clearly defined as a data discrepancy extract student information. Also, I named it DD SINF parent. So if you're going to do it multiple times, there's a value in naming your extracts. And there's 3.4 KB, right? So it's a small file. One thing that I do want to point out that I've experienced is every extract has a header row. You never will see a 0 byte extract. So I made a SSID extract earlier. This tells me there was a problem with my request. No data was returned. You will never see that with a data discrepancy extract. There's always something because there's a header row. And perhaps this is an example here. It's very small. Let's download this. There's data, but you can see the header row is here. That's something to be aware of. If you see you have made an extract and there's data, but when you open it up, all you see is a header row. Either you've requested the wrong type of DD extract, you're looking at student information and you requested a SENR, and there are no SENR data discrepancies, that can happen. Okay, so here we can see we have our student information data discrepancy extract. All these students have fake names, and you can see there's a header row here. And so this is a little bit of nuance. Typically, we would take an extract and import it using the CALPADS user manual into a template. Don't do that because you already have the header row, okay? So this is, you just want to import it into Excel. So you just open a blank copy of Excel, a blank workbook here. We're going to go to data, get data. There's multiple ways to do this. This is the classic way we teach. From text, since all extracts are .csv files, I'm going to select the extract, click import. I definitely want to be in A1, right? It's a delimited file, right? Caret delimited. So you can see the caret. Click next. Other. We're going to set our delimiter. So now you can see that it's been divided into columns, right? Next, want to highlight everything. So we'll slide this slide bar over, shift and click, change everything to text. That way any leading zeros don't get dropped. And we're almost finished. So we click finish and it gives us an option. It says equal A1, cell A1, right? I'm going to just overwrite anything, even though it's blank, and click OK. And so you can see that it's imported nice and neat. Again, there's a bit we're like missing a column value. School of attendance appears to be off. But this is the academic year. This is just a nuance of the test, right? We're not ready for the rollout yet, but it will, this is how the extract will be presented. Now, there is a difference between this and the template. Because this is a rejected record file, all your rejected record information is in the final 4 columns. So bear with me for a moment as I cut and paste. And so the last 4 columns identify the academic year of the data discrepancy, the error code. It has a description and a runtime. Okay? That information is so that you can reference the error using tools like the error list or the CALPADS user manual. And it would be expected that either you modify the records here, go back to your student information system, make the modifications, and then submit a new file to CALPADS, however you do it. But this is how you would make mass corrections and manage mass records at one time. So that's the navigation and basic functionality of the data discrepancy UI. Okay, so now that's a demonstration of the functionality and the nuances pertaining to the data discrepancy UI. Okay, so access to the data discrepancy screen comes from the edit role. However, even with just a SCNR search role or a view role, you can access this screen. You can access the filters. You can see the different errors on the summary grid, okay? To actually see the errors, you need access to those specific roles. Okay, so I have this CSIS Training Berkeley Unified account. I'm down to 4 roles, all right? So let's go back here to our data discrepancies. Hit F5 so we can see how the account changes affect my access. And so I can still see all the errors on the summary grid. Remember, I had 23 fatal errors, but you will notice down here in the display grid, I have no access to those student information records. And so that's how the account roles limit your access. I can't do any management or investigation of the student information records because I only have the SPED edit role, the SPED view role, and student search, and of course, LA administrator, so I can put my account back to the way I want it. And so, keep that in mind, right? Those that need access need the appropriate roles. And then school level accounts do not have access. And that's because some data is not associated to a school. And CELA data is not associated to a specific school. Your special education data doesn't have to be associated to any school. The relationship could be at the LEA level. So, those things to think about. However, your CELPA, right? The CELPA code will have access to the data discrepancy screen. Yeah, and I don't know if there's any data that would generate a data discrepancy for Sacramento County CALPA in the test environment. Let's try another one. The CELPA should have access. And I know it's a CELPA because of the 4-digit code. So you can see here that the CELPA has visibility and access to resolving data discrepancies. So now let's see if I have a school level account for you. So we're going to select Galt High School. And you can see it says access denied. So let me show you. This is the LEA account I have, Galt Union High, 49 roles, right? My school level account has every role except for LEA administrator, so it's 48 roles. And despite having 48 roles, the school level has no access to the data discrepancy screen whatsoever. So whoever's resolving your errors will need at least an LEA level account. So keep that in mind in how you're managing accounts for the users in your LEA. So now we have gone over the nuances of functionality. We've talked about the filters, the summary grid, the display grid, the extracts, how to execute a search. We've done all that. So now let's set some expectations and look at system processing and the effect data discrepancies has on it and how data discrepancies are processed. Okay, so talking about system processing, any changes within this 5-year period, right? So it could be historical data in the ODS, it could be data that affects future years, can trigger data discrepancies. Once it's posted to CALPADS, it can trigger a data discrepancy. And so as you're submitting data via batch file or online maintenance, you have to be conscious of this discrepancy start and run time. Now, you can see that the run start time was 152 and the run completion time was 154. This is atypical. I am in a test environment. There's not a lot of data and there's not a lot of changes. So do not expect a 2-minute run and start time. In this same test environment, I've waited several hours with the same limited data. There's other conditions into the system that will affect your discrepancy run and start time. The amount of data, the amount of changes, not only for you and your LEA, but every other user in the system. So just keep that in mind. Similar to the CDDs at the end of year, we're seemingly taking 24 hours or so. There is a variable where discrepancies may run that long. So just understand the test environment, you're going to have faster results. But the important thing to take away is the runtime is the start of processing. So every record posted prior to 152, if it triggers a discrepancy, I would expect it to be listed below if it was posted prior to 152. All those records between the start time and the completion time. So if I post records at 153 or 205, they're not going to be included. It's not going to catch them. It's only those records posted prior to the start time. All right. So keep that in mind when you're looking at the run, start, and completion time. And then when you're thinking about efficiency, right? If you're submitting several files over the course of a few days or a few hours, you may want to think about those submissions and not try to resolve data discrepancies until you get run complete times, right? So you may have a pause in posting or submission, and you may wait for a new run start time and then a run finish time. That way you can ensure the data that was submitted has undergone data discrepancy processing. Your data in CALPADS has been validated, right? So, what you can do is look at this run start time and then go to the file submission screen. And if I have a 152 run start time, I know this record that I just posted is not going to be reflected on my DD screen. I have a submitted date at 2:54. Let's refresh this. I want to look at posted records, not validating, right? So I apologize for that. Let's see what happens when the screen refreshes. I have a posted record at 2:54, right? That's the status. So I know it's not going to be included in this set of DDs. So until I get a new set of DDs to trigger, now what I also have noticed is I did submit at 1:51, and at 1:52 was the kickoff. So perhaps this posted record might trigger a new set of DDs for me. That will be great. If so, I will have a start time and no run time. So that's how you know when DDs are currently processing. You'll have a discrepancy run start time and no end time. That's basically CALPADS saying your data discrepancies are currently in process. All right. And so you can see, I clicked refresh, F5, and you can see that we have a discrepancy run start time of 9:08 at 2:56, and it has completed at 2:57. So now, even this record that posted is included in my data discrepancies. So if there's any data discrepancies that triggered as a result of that record, it should have triggered. Okay, so now let's look at what the behavior is as you're working on a data discrepancy. Let's pick an SSID, missing parent, guardian, highest education level code. Remember, clicking the view button opens a view of the record, but it's probably more efficient to go to the student details. So I click paste. We're going to search for the student. Here we are at the student's record. We're going to go to demographics, the student information. I'm going to open and click edit. And Beatsmeister, we're going to scroll down through the student's record and parent, guardian, highest education level. And let's do college graduate. What's the student's name? Meister. Mr. Meister. And second parent. Miss Meister. We covered our basis. Let's post this record. Okay, so we've posted the record. We'll go back to the file submission page, confirm that. Hitting F5. Okay, so the record's posted at 3:05, and we'll go back to the data discrepancy screen. We have a discrepancy runtime at 3:06. So the data discrepancies just began, right? And if we try to look at that record, we get error occurred. What that tells me from my experience is the data is correct. Remember, the view button is a view of what's in the ODS. I've corrected the error already. So we're going to find this SINF 0453F1 error. It doesn't exist. CalPAD's not smart enough to say, hey, it's finished. That's why it's running the discrepancy process. But if you get that error occurred, it may mean that your corrections may mean that those corrections were effective and appropriate. Now, if we look at another error, and I'm just showing you this so you can see, only impacted the error that I corrected. The other error exists. That data hasn't been corrected. So CALPADS, I click view, it looks in the ODS, it can bring up that information that triggered that data discrepancy. This one was corrected, so we get the error occurred. Now, as I've been talking, trying to explain that, the discrepancy has been running. I'm gonna click F5. The discrepancies process should be complete. It's been taking 2 minutes on average in this test environment. Well, it's still running. And so when it's complete, I would expect to have one less missing education level code. And I would also expect not to be able to see this student listed any longer. Let's hit F5. It should be just about done. So we see it took 2 minutes, 306 to 308. That's how you can expect it to process. Not as fast. So you're going to have to exercise some patience. But generally speaking, if you resolve the data in the CALPADS during processing, you'll get error occurred and you'll know the data is corrected because CALPADS can't find the erroneous data that's triggering the data discrepancy. Once your data discrepancy runtime has completed, you can expect a change in the summary and in the listing of DDs, both in the summary grid and the display grid. So here we are at the certification detail screen for fall 1, and you can see that there's a difference in the run start time and the run completion time. So that comparison between DDs and CDDs and runtimes is invalid. So it's a waste of your time to try to make that or find symmetry. But what you will find, and what I've consistently found, is that the number of errors are the same. So you can even see here that on the DD screen, we're down to 9 SINF 0453 F1 errors, and that hasn't been reflected yet. But at one time, it was 13 and 10, as well as you'll notice that the SPRG 0550 F1 error, that one warning we had is still there as well. Now, you don't see all these other errors because if you look at the prefix, it's a cert error, cert. So your certification errors are subject to snapshot processing and rules and are only found on the certification detail screen. The CDDs with these record type prefixes, whether it's student information, special education services, or student program, those are going to be found on the DD UI, and it's most useful to use that UI before you have a snapshot processing window where you're just submitting files and the snapshot hasn't begun. Anything prior to census day in fall 1, the period of fall 1 submission before we start fall 2 snapshots, that period in between fall 2 and the beginning of end of year snapshots. That's when the DDUI is most useful. So that's what you can expect to see as far as system processing. Again, just temper your expectations. What's been demonstrated in this video is in the test environment. And so we don't have the amount of data or the amount of users. And so the other stressors involved in the system are not in this environment. So things process a lot more quickly. Okay, so with that, we're ready to move into the wrap up.